What's up, everybody? Garrett back here, and I can't believe it's December. The holiday season is here, and man, I feel like October and Halloween was just here, and I was just doing a video similar to this around Halloween, going back in time and talking about some of my favorite kids' Halloween specials growing up. Now, again, Halloween is such an important time to me. It was such a magical time to me growing up. It actually was a nice precursor into my love for horror movies, was how much I loved things like Halloween. Now, again, besides Halloween, Christmas was so magical to me growing up. I'm sure if you were a kid of the 80s, even the 90s, and before that, the 70s and 60s, when you lived in a time pre-social media, pre-internet, things just felt so different. As we get older, that magic starts to fade. But what I like to do to kind of bring some of that magic back is to go back in time, and it could be things through music, television, movies, to try to bring back such a special time in my life. Now, what I want to do today is I want to talk about some of these classic kids' Christmas specials of the 80s. Now, why just the 80s? Because the 80s is when I pretty much grew up, and I was such a little kid, so a lot of these specials we're going to talk about meant so much to me because of the age I was, and because when some of these specials hit, it was like you kind of had to be there. That was the thing about being around back then, is you couldn't stream it. If you missed it, you may have missed it for a complete year. Some of these I don't even think re-aired years later. So it was kind of like a big event. You were talking about it with the kids from school. You went home, you put it on, and that's why a lot of these stuck with me, because it was so built up as something important, because you knew if I don't see this tonight, I may not see this for another year, if not ever again. So that's what makes these so special. And bringing it back, like I said, a lot of the classics that we know took place before the 80s. Some of these are considered classics. Rankin and Bass movies and Frosty the Snowman and all the Rudolph and Charlie Brown, like all that stuff was pre-80s. So it carried over as classics. And I watched it throughout the 80s and even after that. But there's some here that came out in the 80s that just, to me, are all-time classics. I want to talk about those today. Now, again, I'm going to give you my 10 favorite. I will give you honorable mentions as well. But before I start, one of the reasons I wanted to do this, not only, like I said, I want to give you guys something to kind of search out. I want to give you guys something to kind of unlock memories. And I came across these tapes. Now, these tapes I have actually acquired. These were my neighbor's tapes, and she had given them to me. There was Halloween specials, there's Christmas specials, but these tapes, and I've talked about these in the channel a long time ago before, is what we used to watch every single year, and we used to record things off the TV. They record a lot more than we did when it came to these things, but this is what kind of kept these movies alive for us. Even if we saw them in December, we might say, hey, let's watch all the Christmas movies, and it could be July, right? So that's what was kind of special about these tapes, and I was able to acquire them. So when I look at the labels on here and see all these different ones that I could be talking about today, it's just wild that there's so many memories on this tapes, and how many times we have watched these tapes growing up. So when I give you my honorable mentions at the end, the ones that didn't make my top 10 list, you're going to want to stick around, because I'm going to talk about some of the ones that are on here that even when I read them, I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that movie. So it's going to be super fun to kind of go through some memories on these, but let's start with my top 10, and we're going to talk about the one that came out the earliest. And I didn't see this when this aired. I was an infant, so I did not see this. This was 1983, but this was something that is on these tapes here that we watched a lot years and years after, that, in my opinion, has remained so special to me. And it's not one that a lot of people really talk about, because as much as it might not be a classic to them, it's definitely a classic to me, and that's going to be 1983's British made-for-TV movie, The Snowman. Now, The Snowman, I don't think I own this at all, this movie, but it's on one of these tapes. I'm not sure if this even has a physical media. It is on YouTube, so if you want to check it out. Everybody always talks about Frosty the Snowman, which again came out, I think, in like the late 60s, early 70s, but was always considered a classic. That animated one, Happy Birthday, that one, that's the one everybody talks about. But this British one, The Snowman, was a real cool flick. I mean, it's not that long as far as I remember, but it's silent. There's no words in this at all. There's no dialogue here, so I can see this not being one that people are really attracted to or fond of, but this was something really magical. What they were able to do with no dialogue and through the music and stuff like that was really cool. And I think if you guys haven't checked this thing out, it's a real fun one, and it's good for kids of all ages. So I mean, even if you have a 2-year-old, like literally there's no dialogue at all, but it's just a real cool story, and it gets your imagination going as well. But it is definitely a classic that we watched a lot growing up, and I wanted it to make this list just because, again, it was super important to me, my brother, my neighbors, and we used to definitely check this out every year. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is another classic. This is a classic, this movie itself, but what this is based on is considered a Christmas classic, and that is The Christmas Carol. That story with Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim, like that story in general, I'm a huge fan of. So all those adaptations through the 70s and 80s, like I love those adaptations a lot. Like every time they do an adaptation of that story, I'm always down to check it out because I just love it so much. And there was definitely some great ones out there. But the first one that I saw growing up, because I was so young, and this came out again in 1983, and I don't think I would have seen this in 83, but I did watch it a lot as the years went on because that was also on a videotape that I had growing up. And that is Mickey's Christmas Carol, which I think is a fantastic adaptation, an animated adaptation of the Christmas Carol. This is such a great flick, so much so that I had to pick this up on Blu-ray when it was released. I don't even know if this was like a Disney Rewards, I don't remember, but I knew when I was able to get my hands on this, I definitely wanted to because it meant so much to me as a kid. And not only this movie, but like there was some shorts before this with Goofy skiing and stuff like that, the Chip and Dale and the Christmas tree, like those were always so special to me too. And those always were kind of short films that were before this main one on the tape I had growing up, and they are still on this as well. So very, very cool to have this. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, I watched Mickey's Christmas Carol a lot as well, because I do think that has gotten a lot of fanfare. And if you're a kid of the 80s, you definitely know Mickey's Christmas Carol. And like I said, it's a fantastic adaptation of that story. All right, now this one is going to be a little bit more of a deep cut, I think. This one I can remember airing. So this was 1984. I was a toddler at this point, but I can remember this clear as day. Now, I'm almost positive I watched the day it aired. It could have been maybe a rerun the year later or something, but this isn't one that continued each year to be available. I don't own this thing. I don't even know if you can get this thing, but it is on YouTube. And this is the Glo Friends Save Christmas. Now, what the hell are the Glo Friends? Now, the Glo Friends were based off of a toy of my childhood, like one of my first toys as a kid, and it was a glow worm. Now, I don't think I still own this. It could maybe be at my parents' house in the attic in a bag, maybe. I don't have it here, I do not think, but this was a classic 80s toy that I wouldn't mind making sure I acquire again someday, but I love this damn thing. It was a huge hit, I think, in the 80s, but at least to me it was. And so much so that it spun off like a show called the Glo Friends, which also had figures, because I can remember having these little toys of these, and I almost feel like it had like a hole at the bottom, and they were kind of rubbery or like a soft plastic. They could have been like in Happy Meals for all I know, but I remember having some of these as well. And the Glow Worm and all his pals were the Glo Friends, and it was a TV show that they had. I don't think it aired too long, but this was one that I remember sitting in front of the TV and watching as a little kid. I can remember exactly where I was sitting, which is insane to me, and watching this thing growing up, and it always stuck with me, so much so that, again, once I got the internet, I was able to find it again, because this wasn't something that was readily available. But huge deep cut, and a fun 80s cartoon. Let me know if anybody out there remembers the Glo Friends and the Glo Friends Save Christmas. All right, we're going to bring it to 1985. I remember seeing this as well the first time it aired. And when you were a kid of the 80s, especially a boy in 1985, there was one thing that you were completely obsessed over. And that was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I've talked about this before. I'm a huge He-Man fan. It was actually my first action figure that I ever had was He-Man and Skeletor and all those guys. I watched the show religiously. I was a He-Man mark. Now, again, there was something about that show. I used to run around my house with a sword in my back thinking I was He-Man. I was completely obsessed with He-Man, everything He-Man. I had like toothbrushes and backpacks and lunchboxes and toys. I mean, everywhere at my house around this time was He-Man related. For a good couple of years of my childhood was very He-Man oriented. But there was a Christmas special. There was a Christmas special dedicated to He-Man, and that was He-Man, a Christmas special. And this also had She-Ra, which was like the girl version of He-Man, and that's always the way I looked at it growing up, because like I said, my neighbor who owned these tapes here, it was a boy and a girl, and the girl was so big into She-Ra, and she was my age, and I was really big into He-Man, and to get this Christmas special where these two actually finally meet up was pretty special at the time. Now, upon rewatch, this isn't the greatest Christmas special. I think out of all the ones I'm talking about today, this is the one that I kind of could say I would recommend maybe the least. But as a kid, this thing was so cool. I can remember being so wowed that they actually got these two together in their own show. And it was just kind of a weird story. It's like about these two kids that I think they're trying to cut a tree down, and like Orko comes by and convinces them to come to Eternia, which is super weird. And like I said, He-Man, he dresses up like Santa. It's pretty wacky, bonkers, kind of anything special, but it definitely was one I want to talk about today. This almost made my honorable mention, to be honest with you, based on the rewatch and me feeling like, it wasn't as good as I thought it was. So I'll talk about the one in my honorable mentions that took this spot. And then you can tell me at the end of this video which one should have had that top spot. But that's 1985's The He-Man Christmas Special. I'm sure, like I said, as a kid, this was super special to me. And I'm pretty positive, especially if you were a boy of the 80s, this was probably pretty special to you too. All right, the next one was one that I saw when it aired. And this was a big deal. This was like the movie of the week around Christmas time. And I did a full video on this, talking about this movie and my love for this movie. And even going back to when I first started my channel, I think I did a video talking about my favorite underrated Christmas movies. And this was on there. And I'm going to talk about it again because it was such a cool movie. And it was almost like one of those fever dream type movies back in the day where we taped it off TV. I watched it a bunch of times, lost the tape. I got older. I kept thinking about it, thinking, did I dream this movie? What was this? And I had to do a little research on the internet when I was in my teen years to make sure that this thing was legit real. And it just came out on Blu-ray, which still boggles my mind because I had the VHS of this movie. And that is the adaptation of Babes in Toyland. Now, this is a live-action adaptation of the story Babes in Toyland. This was the Babes in Toyland that I knew. So when people talked about Babes in Toyland, this was the Babes in Toyland that I always thought about. And this thing, it kind of could fall in the same realm as, like we talked about on this channel before, something like Peanut Butter Solution, where it was a made-for-kids movie, but so freaking out there and such a fever dream of a movie. And it had an all-star cast. I mean, you got Keanu Reeves, you got Drew Barrymore, you got Richard Mulligan, you've got Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi in this thing. And this thing is freaking bonkers. Basically, it's about Drew Barrymore is a sister, and her other sister, her oldest sister, that you horror fans may know, Jill Scholine. She's working at a toy store at the beginning with Keanu Reeves' character. They're driving home on Christmas Eve, and there's a snowstorm, and they get in a car accident. When they wake up, they're in Toyland. Toyland seems like just kind of like almost like a theme park type thing. We have a place around me called Storyland, which really reminds me of Toyland here. But yeah, in this Toyland, you have Richard Mulligan's character playing the villain, and he lives inside a bowling ball, and it's a freaking wild, wacky movie. There's like toy soldiers that come alive. There's these weird, like, I don't know, muck men or something like that they spring from the depths of Toyland to attack all the people that live there. And I mean, this thing is bonkers. I recommend this to anybody who hasn't seen it. Kino Lorber put this out on Blu-ray. I can't even believe this. But it looks fantastic. The best it's ever looked. I highly recommend this one. I just think it's just a batshit crazy kids movies from the 80s with this all-star cast. So if you didn't catch my video talking all about that, I actually did a collaboration with Wes over at Dead Pit talking about this release and how much this movie meant to us. So Babes in Toyland from 1985, you definitely want to check that one out. All right, the next one I'm going to talk about is from 1987. And this is a Muppets movie, but not just any Muppets movie. This is a Muppet Family Christmas. Now, this one I do not own on physical media. I'm not even sure where you can watch this, probably YouTube, but this is one that's on these tapes as well that were recorded off TV, and man, this blew me away. This is probably the best, in my opinion, Muppets special ever, and it's about the Muppets going to a house. I'm trying to think whose house it was. Was it Fozzie's house for Christmas? And it wasn't just them coming. You had the cast from Sesame Street there. The Fraggles showed up. I mean, everybody that you watched as a kid coming together for this Muppet special was wild to me, to have these cast of characters from Sesame Street and the Muppets coming together and interacting. And being a little kid around that time, I was completely mind blown by this. And like I said, you had Fraggle Rock, and they kind of started to collaborate and intertwine all these shows together. It was such a cool experience the first time I saw this thing. It almost felt like two wrestling promotions coming together for an event, because as a kid, you didn't really realize that they were intertwined so much. Like, you know, you saw Kermit on both, but this is a real good, feel-good movie. So I highly recommend Muppets Family Christmas. I hope someday it's released again for us physical media collectors, because I would love to have that in my collection. And let me know, is it released again? I think it had an out-of-print DVD that I never was able to acquire, but nothing since then, right? All right, the next one I'm going to talk about, number 7, is going to be Garfield. Garfield's Christmas. It is Garfield Christmas. That's what it's called. I showcase this in my Halloween specials. This is the Garfield Holiday Collection. So we've got, you know, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas in here. And the Christmas special is not as good as the Halloween, but it's really good. They go to John's parents' house, and you meet John's family, his parents, and you meet the grandmother, and just a really good kind of feel-good story. And the grandmother's a trip in this as well. So I always kind of like this one a lot. Very Christmas-esque. It just brings a lot of those Christmas vibes. This is one that I find myself watching about every single year. And I have since I first saw it back in the mid-'80s. So I'm sure this is one that most of you probably have seen, is maybe on your rotation or your kids' rotation at this point, but that's Garfield's Christmas. All right, number 8 came out in 1988, and this one blew my mind as well. Talking about the 80s and what I said about He-Man, I mean, you had to be a fan of He-Man if you were a boy of the 80s. Same thing here in the 80s. Everybody was a fan of Pee Wee Herman. You had the movies, you had the show, but he also had a Christmas special that aired as well called Pee Wee's Playhouse Christmas Special. And I can remember watching this for the first time and absolutely loving it. I mean, this thing has a boatload of celebrities on it, a full cast of characters, so much so that it was a lot of characters and actors and actresses that I first saw in this special as a kid. Like, I didn't know who a lot of these people were until I saw this movie growing up. Now, I'm not sure if this has any other edition besides this one. I think it might have a Shout Factory, maybe Blu-ray, I'm not sure, or a re-release, but guys, you gotta check this out. I can remember as a kid, he was getting all the fruitcakes, and he was kind of getting pissed off because everybody was bringing him fruitcakes. And, you know, being a kid, I started to think fruitcakes were a bad thing because it seemed like he was so mad that he kept getting them. And then the scene where he's outside going in the snow and he goes, "Yellow snow!" And that always made me laugh. But Pee-wee's Playhouse Christmas Special is one of my absolute favorite holiday specials, and it happened to come from 1988. All right, staying in 1988, I saw this one airing for the first time in 1988. And this was a very Brady Christmas. This is another deep cut, I think, when it comes to this list, is this Brady Bunch Christmas. This thing aired in the 80s, which means they all were older, which was super weird at the time, but I always found it fascinating because the Brady Bunch was a show that I watched all through my childhood. It was always on. So being a little kid and seeing these people now older, I was so confused. Like, I'm like, is it the same actors? Like, what's going on here? Not realizing that I was watching a show from way back when I was watching the Brady Bunch. But, you know, now going back and watching it, it was just pretty damn cool to see this kind of all take place where everybody pretty much comes back except Cindy. I don't really know the reason why Cindy didn't come back. I never looked into it, but the chick that played Cindy, I was like, oh my God, that's the girl from Ghostbusters, right? So it was cool now to kind of see that, and as a kid as well to see that. And it was kind of confusing because I then thought for a little bit that was really Cindy. So I don't know, but the Very Brady Christmas is a real cool flick. Basically, all the kids, the family, they all come back together. They've got spouses now. They've got lives now outside of the house. And, you know, they've got families. It's just really, really cool. And it's just one of those ones that, like the show, where everything seems great, but then something happens, something drastic happens, and there's a little bit of doubt, like, oh my God, how are they going to get out of this? And then there's definitely more of like that happy ending at the end. But another deep cut. This one is hard to find. I think you can probably watch it on streaming, especially now around this time of year. I would definitely check it out. But I have this old VHS that I've had for a long time. So A Very Brady Christmas is definitely one, if you haven't seen, I highly recommend. All right, and the last one I'm going to talk about, I do not own this. This came out in 1989. I can remember seeing this for the first time, I think at my friend Randy's house. It was like we made an event out of it because there was a lot of talk in school. I think it was elementary school, about this show or this Christmas special that was coming out with these characters that we've never seen before. And that was The Simpsons Christmas in 1989. I think it was called like The Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire or something. But basically it was almost like The Simpsons pilot episode, and it was a Christmas special. And it did so well that it spun off, you know, more episodes. More episodes. I mean, Jesus, Simpsons is the longest reigning TV show of all time, but that is where it started in 1989 on that Christmas special. And man, you met the dog, Santa's little helper, and how he kind of came part of the family. You learn all that there in the pilot, and man, it's just wild to me. We loved it. We thought this was so cool. Like, you know, Bart was kind of a little bit of a smartass, and, you know, being a kid at like second grade or third grade, and we could kind of like relate to him or whatever. But yeah, very, very cool to think that in 1989 is where The Simpsons started, and it had all to do with a Christmas special. So I definitely had to include that in this list, even though it was the tail end of the 80s, but it meant so much to me at the time and what was to come after for those characters. All right, gang, that is my top 10 favorite. But like I said, I do have a bunch I want to talk about. Now, the first one I want to talk about that almost made the top 10. When I pick 10, there's always ones that I could have done 15 and they would have made the list, because people are going to be like, oh, I can't believe that didn't make your top 10. It's here. It's here in spirit. I almost picked this over He-Man, like I said, but I'd only seen this like one or two times in my life. But I can remember it was a deep cut, and it felt very similar to like the Glo Friends. Like, I can remember sitting there waiting for this to air at night, and, you know, I had my pajamas on, and all of a sudden it aired, and my brother and I was sitting there, and we're like, oh my God, like, it's here, like, this is it. And it was a Cabbage Patch Christmas. I think it was called the Cabbage Patch First Christmas. Now, we know the Cabbage Patch Kids, they were huge in the 80s, mostly for girls, but for whatever reason, this episode or this special was just something that was really kind of built up, and I can remember watching it for the first time, and I remember liking it, and I can remember seeing it again. I think it was probably on some of these tapes here, but I have not seen this in many, many years. Now, another one, kind of a deep cut, was Pac-Man Christmas, which was weird because, you know, being a video game fan of the 80s, you had Pac-Man cartoons, and they had a Christmas special that I always thought was really cool. Now, I'm going to read off these tapes, and again, these might not all be 80s, but this is just an idea of what we were watching around this time, because these were some that were taped off TV. It was A Year Without Santa Claus, Leprechaun Gold. I don't remember that one at all. Maybe that rings a bell for some of you guys. Rudolph's Shiny New Year, Christmas Raccoons. I don't remember that either. Mickey's Christmas. I think it was Mickey's Christmas Carol. Yogi Bear's Christmas, which is one I do remember checking out as well. Let's see what's on this one. So this one has the Glo Friends on it, which we talked about. All right, this one here, Rudolph, Charlie Brown, A Night Before Christmas. A Night Before Christmas was one of my favorites, but that was an older one, but I really like that with the mouse. Snowman, like we talked about, The Grinch, Frosty the Snowman, Cabbage Patch Christmas, that is on this. Life of Santa, I don't remember that one. A Bear Who Slept Through Christmas, I don't remember that one either, but these are the tapes that we used to constantly watch on rotation, so I might go back and check out some of these and see if they're on YouTube or something. And these are some more like horror ones. This was the Alice in Wonderland two-parter that I've talked about a lot on this channel, which is one of my favorite made-for-TV movies. I haven't done a standalone of that one. It's been on lists and other things, but if you guys want me to do a standalone on Alice in Wonderland, I'd be happy to talk about that one. And this last one is the Halloween specials. So that's the Halloween specials. But man, going back in time and thinking about this time, it just really brings back a lot of memories for me. Like I said, Christmas is a time of year that was so magical to me. It meant so much to me. It's almost even hard to relive that. But the best way I can do it is obviously through talking about this stuff, rewatching some of this stuff, to bring back that magic of the holiday. So hopefully I was able to unlock a lot of memories for you guys watching today. And if you like this, let me know. I love doing these lists. What else do you want to see? I've got a bunch coming. Not Christmas related. I did a whole holiday horror essential video. If you haven't checked that out, I talk about like 50 Christmas movies that are horror movies based around Christmas. So definitely check that one out. And guys, if you're into this kind of stuff, make sure you like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below talking about any of the ones I mentioned here, any of your favorites on this list. Did I miss something out of all these movies I talked about that maybe I just haven't seen or need to check out? So start building that watch list now based on some of the stuff I talked about. I will definitely be seeing you guys back on the channel, so make sure you hit those notifications so you can come by, especially when I'm live. That's when I love interacting with all of you. And if I don't catch you, have a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. This is Garrett at Born2beRad, and like always, stay rad.